Yoga Philosophy for Everyday Living, a podcast to bring the ancient wisdom of yoga to inform your everyday living on and off the mat. Hi, I am your host, Monica Phillips. So often we sabotage ourselves because of the chatter in our heads. This podcast will take you through the 8 limbs of yoga with leading yoga instructors and introduce you to executives who have brought yoga into their lives so they can thrive. Please listen, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Welcome to Yoga Philosophy for Everyday Living, and I am so glad to be here today with Lisa Walford. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. I really appreciate that you're doing this.
I have the huge honor of meeting you through my YogaWorks teacher training, which has just been an incredible journey. You presented at a workshop recently, and I've taken your classes online, and it's incredible to learn about your practice.
Well, thank you for that. It's so interesting. I've been practicing yoga for close to 40 years. So I've seen kind of the arc of its public appeal and how mainstream has come to embrace it. But when I first started practicing and teaching yoga, I would tell people that I teach yoga, and they would say, "Oh, you mean you burn incense and chant?" And I'd say, "Well, not really." And now when I say I teach yoga, they say, "Oh, you mean I'll sweat and get a good workout?" Well, not really. So it's just interesting to see what the stereotype is. And I'm just grateful to be a part of it at this point.
So true. I love those stories. You're an extraordinary yoga teacher, and you hold a Level III Iyengar teaching certificate. Like you said, you've been teaching in LA since 1982. You study annually with the Iyengars in Pune, India, and you teach worldwide. You were one of the co-creators of the YogaWorks teacher training program that started in 1990 with Maty, Ezraty, and Chuck Miller, who were the founders of YogaWorks. And you studied at UCLA and are the co-author of the longevity diet and the anti-aging plan. Both of those were with your father, is that correct? So your experience and expansiveness is vast, and your awareness of the body and breath and all these things that we're going to talk about come from a really beautiful perspective. Excited to have you talk about pranayama, which is what we're going to talk about today. I wanted to say one thing before, which is that I took your class on Inauguration Day, and I love this quote so much that I shared it with others. You said, "Beneath the fluttering is an inner stillness that brings us resolution."
It was such an auspicious and, dare I use the word, pregnant pause the morning of Inauguration Day, the apprehension. And I knew that so many of my students there, anxiety was tangible in a way. And so much of life is being reactive. And that morning, the morning of Inauguration Day, was so different than the evening of Inauguration Day. But that morning, people's thoughts were all over the board. So I think that when we can go from kind of that surface reactivity and breath and meditation and our yoga practice and particular postures, are such key kind of tools, techniques that we can use to adjust the nervous system and to be able to bring our mind back to a place of equanimity. So first, through the body to a place of equilibrium, and then the mind to a place of equanimity. And when we can go from that surface level of the mind fluttering into that kind of deep inner stillness, then the reason I used resolution, there's a sense of resolution because all of the yes but maybes dissolve, and we can come to a state of deep rest. From that state, we kind of know what's appropriate.
Kind of like what you said about what is yoga. When we get to that inner calm, we stop the chatter in our head, we get out of our way, and then we allow ourselves to become more of who we are. So isn't that also what pranayama is all about, is the breath that allows us to gain stillness?
There's so much about the breath. No. From how maybe your mother told you when you were little, before you get angry, take 3 breaths. Superficial ways that we recognize the impact of the breath. And now as it's again becoming more mainstream and people acknowledge it, that there's a very deep physiological change that happens when we are afflicted by whatever it is, a real threat or a perceived threat, an imaginary threat. It affects the breath, it affects the entire nervous system. Conversely, the breath can change the nervous system. It can change the chemical balance inside the body. And with that, we then change the state of mind. So such a powerful, it can be both a mirror. What is the quality of my breath? Is it agitated? Is my breath smooth? Is it soft? Is it harsh? So it can be a mirror, and it can also be a bridge, take us from one state to another.
You did a Kapali bhati breath in class on Inauguration Day, and I know that breath to be cleansing. Could that be used as a way to help people who've had COVID recover and
No,
heal? No.
I actually very rarely teach Kapalapati. I taught it that day because, in a way, it's like if somebody's really anxious and you say, okay, just calm down, that doesn't help. Just chill, But so the Kapalapati, I spent a lot of time, as you know, focusing on the posture, how we position the body, creating that skillful means gave the mind something to focus on. And conversely, I talked a lot about the diaphragm and the abdomen. How can we sit in such a way that we soften the diaphragm, the solar plexus, which is the seat of fire? How can we sit in such a way to be upright, still, quiet? And only then did I introduce, it wasn't even Kapalapati, it was Bhastrika, where there's a strong emphasis on the exhalation. My reason for doing that, in the sense of purging that anxiety, to exhale and exhale and exhale, throw that inner chaos out in the very skillfully created container of the body.
What do you call it?
Bhastrika.
You had us put a block between our shoulder blades at the base of our shoulders up, and it felt so good. I actually loved feeling my shoulder blades connect with the block.
And first we started lying down, the shoulder blades on the block. So much of how we orient ourselves in life is what's in front of me through our eyes, the relationship with what I see right now. We spend a lot of time on camera. And so in that class, I really wanted to, and in many pranayama class, I really wanted to bring the kind of outward going orientation toward the back of the body. And that when we soften this, we turn our outward looking gaze inward. And so by starting lying down on the block, the sensitivity then was, what is the shape of my shoulder blades on the block? So the block then gave us feedback and sensitivity to the back of the body. With that sensitivity, and that really is the foundation for pranayama, becoming more sensitive. And in the Iyengar system, because the body is the vehicle through which we cultivate sensitivity, bringing that sensitivity to the back of the body, to the skin and the shoulder blades on the back of the body, would take this overactive front brain into a more reflective state. So that was my reason for doing that.
I use breath in my coaching a lot as a way to calm and center the mind. And it seems like, oh, we all breathe, but how many of us actually pay attention to our breath? And so this fourth of the 8 limbs of yoga, as Patanjali outlines, is important about noticing the breath. And then what happens when we link the breath with movement?
Yes. Since you mentioned Patanjali, what I think is really helpful is to give context for that 4th stage. In reading the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is one of many texts, but it's one that adopted and have found great insights through, all of the limbs are kind of practiced simultaneously with one exception, and that is from asana to pranayama. And those particular, there's many sutras, but there's only 3 on asana that lead into pranayama. And the first one, says, well, asana, the seat. It's not even talking about down dog or any of those. It just says the seat. And I kind of, in a way, I interpret that as being, or one way of interpreting it is, where's the seat of my intelligence, as opposed to how are my buttock bones or whatever. The seat be stable and still, kind of stable and content. And then the next sutra says that we release the effort and come to a state of effortlessness. And from that state, then the 3rd sutra says, then we're no longer in a state of confliction between yes, no, in a state of duality, in a state of kind of polar opposites. Then starts pranayama. It's the only place in the sutras where they say there is a particular way to do this. And what that tells me is that we need a certain inner equilibrium. And so the practice of pranayama in its transformative sense, as opposed to being an everyday skill that we can use to get us through a difficult moment. So the practice of pranayama as a transformative practice in and of itself begins from a state of inner equilibrium and equanimity. Because what The Hatha Yoga Pradipika goes on to say, another of the classic texts, is whatever quality you already have in your psyche, pranayama practice will create more of that. Pranayama practice won't necessarily make everything beautiful. It will give you more of whatever you is already there. So if you're already all bound up inside and you may not have the skills to recognize, well, how can I bring myself to this place of inner equilibrium and then go deeper into pranayama? The Yoga Sutras specifically say to start from a place of effortlessness where you're calm. And that's why we start with Shavasana.
It reminds me of this, like you said, if someone comes into a yoga class with a lot of energy, a lot of rajasic energy, you can't take them to Shavasana. And they probably shouldn't be in a yin yoga class. They might need a vinyasa flow to come to arrive in Shavasana so that they now feel calm, because you can't just tell someone to get there, especially in this world we live in with so much busyness. I don't think everyone has the same access to that inner calm.
And again, that's why on that inauguration day class, I chose a more rajasic pranayama so that then afterwards we had a long progressive shavasana. And if I may then follow up on your question about linking the breath with movement, in the Iyengar system, that which is what I practice, is one of many, but a pranayama practice is done separately from the asana practice. What I call pranayama begins with shavasana. So linking breath with movement is linking breath with movement. It's not pranayama. There are other systems who will say, no, ujjayi, we're doing pranayama. So linking breath with movement is helpful for many reasons. There's a fluidity of with the inhalation, when we're resisting gravity, we inhale, and when we're moving with gravity, we exhale, kind of mirroring the natural rhythms of the universe. You inhale and you expand, and you exhale and you contract. It helps people find a calm, abiding nature while they're beginning to build up heat through the vinyasa, through the movement. It's, I think, a good way when somebody is linking breath with movement to use the sound of the breath to gauge whether the movement is particularly aggressive or harsh, or whether they're able to move in and out of the asanas in a conscientious way. So linking breath with movement for many people, I think, is a very organic marriage, and it can bring them to a place where they just feel more expansive and in alignment with the rhythms of nature.
I'm really glad you said that. So in asana practice, we focus on the breath, and it's still quite separate from any pranayama practice that we would do that would come after.
Yes.
There are a lot of different kinds of pranayama, and they all have different effects, from cleansing to calming to energizing. Can you tell us a little bit more about the different kinds and when we might practice certain pranayama, maybe at different times of the day, or like you said, with different moods in the atmosphere?
It's always helpful to start with an exhalation. And this is true with many meditation techniques as well, to just sit quietly and observe the breath. In a good pranayama practice, I think it's helpful to start with breath awareness. We're such control freaks. And that's understandable in the world where we don't feel that we have much control. Would hope for some predictability so that we can prepare ourselves. But in reality, letting go of needing to be in control is how we're able to cultivate that inner resolution that we mentioned in the very, very first part of our discussion, where we're resilient and adaptable. So that rather than trying to hold on, I'm going to inhale for 4 breaths and I'm going to exhale for 4 breaths, or to the count of 4, I'm going to inhale to the count of 4 and exhale to the count of 8. We start with breath awareness, observing the nature of the breath. And that in itself, taking the control out of it, is incredibly potent. Whether one is sitting or whether one is lying down, to become more sensitive to all of the parts of the body that engage with breath. For instance, the jaw and the sinus cavities. We often carry so much tension on the jaw. So when we become really quiet and just observe the breath, and we become sensitive enough to feel tension in different parts of the body. For some people, it may be the shoulders. For others, it may be the solar plexus. So becoming aware of what is already there and beginning to let go of that is a huge way to start. And that takes patience, just something that many people want kind of an instant fix. But a deep transformation and yoga is not an instant fix. It's something that takes devotion and dedication and passion. The passion to cultivate, as you mentioned before, a deep sense of who we as individuals are, who we think we should be or who we think we were, but underneath all those layers of masks that we wear, what is underneath that? The breath awareness, we can start to shed all of those layers. And that can take, when you start lying down, it's helpful because there are physiological changes that happen when we lie down. It's automatically, psychologically, we think, I'm going to rest, I'm lying down. But there's also things that happen with the blood pressure when we lie down that changes the respiratory rate. Respiratory rate changes, it changes blood pressure. So lying down is helpful. And there's other things in our yoga practice that we can do that will help us to become more quiet like that. And then after the breath awareness, then we start to explore, where do I breathe? Where can I breathe? And this is where there's quite a bit of variation in pranayama teaching techniques. I don't think that there's any right way. So wonderful about diversity. Some breathing techniques focus on in and the out in the abdomen. In Iyengar yoga, we focus more on the auxiliary breathing muscles, the intercostal muscles, how they can expand. One begins with breath awareness and then with observing where and how the breath can move. And I love that because it feels like every breath has its own unique characteristic. Every breath has a beginning, it has a birth. Every breath has a full moon. Then every breath has its waning moon. And every breath has the pause at the end before you start again. So when I look at it that way, it's just a beautiful song that is punctuated with silence. Now, with the pause before the beginning and the pause at the top before the exhalation, and those transitions are equally potent.
There's so much power in the teacher naming the body part. The first time someone said to me, breathe into your big toe. Of course, we don't actually breathe into our big toe, but that naming process allows us to notice where we experience it. And so I loved how you said, like, the intercostal muscles versus the abdomen. Where are you breathing? How does it feel in your body? What is the spaciousness? And for anyone watching or listening, that can allow your mind to shift where you notice the breath.
Awareness is everything. There's a difference between attention and awareness. What my teacher would say is that attention is vertical, it's very focused, whereas awareness is, it spreads, it's more peripheral. If I look at one thing, that focal point has a, and that is certainly a meditation technique too, but if I soften my gaze and I start to view peripherally and I listen, so what Mr. Iyengar says, when he was alive, what my teacher would say, is that in the pranayama practice, it's not what we see, it's how we listen. As we listen, and it's a very, very deep awareness because listening happens in the element of space. And so when we listen inside the body, awareness, like you said, will shift and we'll go into a particular body part. And awareness changes everything. Again, I think it takes a lot of patience because it's very subjective. It's only now, and it's really quite remarkable, that science in many ways is starting to corroborate what so many of the yogis experienced in their practice.
I've had so many different points in my yoga journey where I've noticed a major shift in my life. At 21, I went to my first studio class in Paris. And then I started practicing regularly because I was hooked. And then I had various changes in my practice throughout the next, now I'm 26 years. Actually, just 3 years ago, I went to an ashram for a week and I thought I knew how to let go. And it was in that week that I actually learned how to let go. And that's when I decided maybe I do want to become a teacher. And my practice became so different in that moment and how I experienced yoga. Was there a moment like that for you where you felt this shift? And then also talk to us about what your own pranayama practice is.
It's so interesting. There are times in life when we kind of pivot. When we all went into quarantine, there was a pivot. And then there are times when you kind of know that something has shifted, to use your word. I started my yoga practice in 1982. I flirted with meditation for the next 10 years. And I'm going to say flirted with the pranayama practice starting probably in 1986. And when I say flirted, what I mean is that I'd say, I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to do my practice. And I would sit for 5, 6 minutes and go, I'm too restless, and I'd leave. But I did that regularly with both my meditation and my pranayama practice for 15 years. And I think it was in 1998 or 2000, I forget. And I was in Pune studying with the Iyengars. And there, as you said, when you went to the ashram, you were on retreat. Well, in Pune, I'd go for 1 or 2 months. I mean, when I was young then, save up enough money to go, and then I'd take my credit card and I'd come back and have to pay off my credit card and kind of go through that cycle again. I'm past that now, but I remember it. So it was, when I had that time away from all of the responsibilities. So I think that's really helpful for people to take. I did the same with my meditation, 10-day Vipassana retreat where no talking, to experience what's possible. And that happens with many people when they go on retreat. Now, I think that a daily pranayama practice can be a little mini retreat. It helps to set up your props the night before, have the intention of what you're going to do the night before. I do that to this day. And I have my pranayama pillow and all of those things. So in 2000, I'm not sure how it shifted or why it shifted, but I decided to take a particular pranayama sequence and to practice that sequence every day for a month. And I think there was something about that regularity that helped me go deeper. So first, the breath awareness. Well, do that every day. Maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's 10. Maybe your mind drifts off or you go, oh, come back to the breath. Here I am. All of that is natural. It's acceptable. It's just what happens. And then at a certain point, that shift happens. I literally have these kind of waves, shavasana waves, you could call them, that would kind of go through the body. But in the pranayama practice, it can be more directed, more tangible. So after I had that established, then I started working with my teachers, different kinds of pranayama practice. What is the difference between a staggered inhalation, Viloma 1, inhale, pause, inhale, exhale? For most people, that's a good way to start because the inhale is affirming. The exhale, we always start with a natural exhalation, like that letting go. But for many people, the depth of pranayama, if we started focusing on the exhale, it's kind of scary because that last exhale is symbolic. So in the beginning, it's helpful to do these gradual inhalations. And then when we stagger the breath like that, inhale, pause, it's a very seamless way to extend the inhalation. And by introducing that pause, it's not that we're holding the breath, it's a moment of silence. So introducing that silent state, that deep rest that happens naturally at the bottom of the exhalation or the top of the inhalation where there's nothing is happening. And then I would say that starting to teach pranayama is what really then took my practice to yet another level, having to find a way to articulate it. Then I had to kind of go deeper into my own practice.
Is there a way for people to practice pranayama within a few minutes? And I'm thinking in Judith Laster's book, she gives this example of this woman who said, oh, yes, I just started a 5-minute a day meditation practice. And Judith kind of laughs it off. Oh, what can you get in 5 minutes a day? And then she realized, actually, that's really wise because that's what she has. She's going to give to it and it's going to be sustainable. I wonder, is there something like that for pranayama as well?
That's what I recommend. Start with something that's easily digestible and 5 minutes, 7 minutes. It generally takes, I think, a minimum of 3 minutes for the parasympathetic nervous system, a minimum to start to calm down. And there's different ways that one can facilitate that. I suggest starting lying down. One way to facilitate that is to take just a very thin blanket or a towel that you can put underneath your spine so that there is some lift to the chest, but then take another blanket or a towel and place it on top of the diaphragm so that that solar plexus area, you think of children or animals, when they protect themselves, they protect the diaphragm, they protect the throat. So if you just put a blanket on top of the diaphragm, that kind of helps to settle the nervous system. starting that way. So start with just quiet, and one can watch again, breath awareness, watch the exhalation, watch the inhalation, watch the thoughts come, watch the thoughts go, watch something evolve and fade, and then slowly begin to invite the breath, not control, but invite. Better for somebody to stop after 5 minutes when they're still a little thirsty than to say, okay, I have to sit here for 15 minutes and then struggle with wondering whether the timer is going to go off or not.
Such a good point and so true. I was kind of laughing to myself because I have a 12-year-old and I invite him in to practice yoga with me, and he loves all of my props. He'll come in and he'll get really comfortable, and then I'll ask him to notice his breath, and then he's Shavasana. And it's so much fun to watch this in kids who have less attachment to certain things. I think that adults learn how to attach themselves to things that just don't matter. I love your newsletter. I really, really love it. And in this last one you shared about the Dalai Lama and kindness and compassion, tell me about the power of breath to cultivate kindness.
I mentioned earlier that the breath could be both a mirror and a bridge. Metta is the Pali word, the Buddhist word for kindness. Maty is in the Yoga Sutras. When we have a discussion about kindness, we're so practice random small acts of kindness. We're so attuned to being kind to another, to be really kind to oneself. How do we support well-being? And kindness can be taking 30 seconds to relax the jaw, or taking 30 seconds to move away from the computer screen. It's not necessarily that piece of carrot cake or something like that.
That sounds pretty good. It could be the carrot cake.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So as with awareness, that the breath is a vehicle for awareness, and awareness rides on the vehicle of the breath. We can take qualities and let them infuse the breath. I think of incense. You see the incense when you first burn it, and then it's everywhere in the air. You know it's everywhere in the air, but you don't see it. So that thought of kindness, at first it's a thought, but it can ride on the breath as it permeates the body. I think it's often hardest to cultivate that for yourself. It may be easier in the beginning, at the end of one's 5-minute or 7-minute pranayama practice, to envision sending kindness to somebody who you know needs that. And so to start with somebody else, and then after that, know that somebody out there may be doing it for you too.
That was so beautiful. I think of our hearts. We radiate more energy from our hearts than from our brain. And we have so much power in our heart center. I think of this heart center as the love, the kindness, and the self-love, compassion, and then empathy to others. And it's contagious. Mm-hmm. When you walk into a room with joy, others feel it. And so self-kindness is actually kindness to others. You allow people, you give them permission to also feel joy.
And again, science, those oxytocins, those neurotransmitters are in there. I'm sure that translates over the computer screen too.
I feel that through you, yeah.
When the poet at the inauguration, Amanda
Gorman.
Yeah. I mean, even now, the day after, I have goosebumps just through that. Empathy was so strong in the pranayama practice to practice kindness and know that it infuses your body and enables healing. So health and healing, people who are living with chronic conditions, when we do impact the parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest, the relaxation response through this kind of neural chemistry. So kindness is not a throwaway. It's very profound. I mean,
what a great way to end. Thank you for so many great insights you gave us. And you have graciously recorded your pranayama series, which is available on your website, lisawalford.com, and in iTunes. So all the links will be on this episode so that people can listen and then join you.
Thanks, Monica. The website, I think, is just Walford. Thank you for this series, and I'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Blessings.
Thanks. Thank you for joining me for Yoga Philosophy for Everyday Living. Please learn more about our guests in the show notes and check out their awesome yoga classes. Subscribe, like, and share this podcast with a friend. And please send me your feedback. I would love to hear from you. You can learn more at sparkpluglabs.co.